You're live.
Yes.
You take your device? No.
Hi, everybody. I'm here with Dr. Henry, and we are here today for our discussion on PLC. So we're just trying to figure out that you are there and that you are with us. So give us a wave or write a comment to say that you are there and that you can hear us well. So just want to see if there are some people with us now. Not seeing any comments yet. Let's see. Comments will appear there.
Maybe a few minutes.
All right, it's live. There's somebody there.
Yeah.
Right, we'll give you a minute or so to just come on board. And we are going to start our discussions by sharing some of the questions that you sent in to us regarding PLCs. And thank you very much for the wonderful response and all the questions and really good questions that you sent in to us to answer during this webinar. So just to give a little bit of background for those of you that don't know, RITE Education is delivering a program called EduLead in several countries, in Indonesia, in Tanzania, in Kyrgyzstan and Lebanon. And one of the topics that we focus on for our EduLead coaches is the use of PLCs as an effective way to not only develop staff, but also to drive student performance. And we called this I'm calling this the transformative power of PLCs, because PLCs really can drive education transformation. So welcome, Dr. Henry.
Thank you very much, Iris.
We're glad to have you here with us again today.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I'm very, very honored to be here and excited to share, whatever we have to talk about today.
Can you give our viewers a small, little bit of insight into why? Pardon the dogs. I don't know why they're barking about. Why PLCs? Why PLCs are so? What's your experience with PLCs, and what's brought you to the point where you feel so confident that it is so meaningful?
Okay. So thank you very much. So this draws back from my own experience as a teacher in Africa, and also as a researcher. So I did my research in Cameroon. One of the things I was looking at was job satisfaction. What makes teachers, giving their best, and what makes them do whatever they will do to deliver the results. And so the PLC came up as a way of, bringing things together in such a way that people could collaborate, people could share their knowledge, people could share their skills, and people could learn in the process and also help their students learn. And so at this stage, there is a lot of empirical evidence which I've gathered from Malaysia in terms of the powerful effect of PLC, and particularly from schools I've worked with. So, for example, we've seen a tremendous change and improvement in math scores from people who used to, score very low and can now raise the achievement bars and also deliver on proficiencies. So it's very a powerful tool that can enable children learn and also help teachers learn how to help their students learn. So yeah, it's quite important.
I've just turned the camera around for the Facebook, so I just want to be sure that you can see it well.
Yeah,
I don't know why it's a little bit blurred now. But we'll continue. Right. Hi, Doa. I see you are watching us, and welcome to our broadcast. Thank you for that insight, Dr. Henry. I think there's been a lot of very interested questions, or people that are very interested in getting some answers to their questions about PLCs. We actually also it's an imperative or an expectation from the Malaysian government that teachers use PLCs, that schools introduce PLCs, and that they use this as a tool for professional development.
Yeah.
And my experience also in schools over the past how many years here and in Malaysia is that it's really the most powerful professional development tool, because teachers take ownership, they work together, they collaborate, and they ask meaningful questions, and it's usually questions that drive learning, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So as we go along, you're welcome to also type some comments or add some feedback, and we will also respond to that. But let's first go to some of the questions that our edu leaders had sent in to us, and we will take a variety from the questions from Indonesia, from Lebanon, from Tanzania, some really powerful questions. And if there are any of the viewers out there who are not from these countries, you are also welcome to share some of your questions with us. So let's go to a question by Mr. Amru from Indonesia. And this is a question that many people actually asked, and that is how do we know that PLCs impact on teaching and learning, or on student learning? How do we know that this is a worthwhile endeavor and worth engaging with? Henry.
Oh, I need to answer that. So how do you know that PLCs are a powerful tool for professional development with an impact on students' learning? It all depends on how it's implemented and how it's being assessed as well. So how do you measure from what are students able to deliver now? What are they able to perform at what proficiency level, at what standards? And how do you implement that process of interventions that can help them, scale up? You can actually scaffold their learning to bring them up to the standards which you want, to the desired results. And then how do you map or, actually evaluate that process to say, okay, it is because of these interventions that we are able to have these results. So in effect, PLCs enable teachers to actually broaden their own knowledge skills, their repertoire of pedagogical skills. It enables them to have a diversified understanding of assessment methods, of what is actually working in their classrooms and what is not working based on their the realities they face. And it also gives them a real opportunity to engage with the data about learning, such a way that they're being empowered by that same information to now develop interventions that could address those learning problems. So that is the thing about PLC, which is very, very strong.
So one thing that stands out for me from what you've said now is that teachers have to engage with data. Because so often we ask the question, how do we know that it's working? And so many coaches ask that question. How do I measure the impact? How do I know it's working? But without meaningful data, you will not be able to determine that. So can you give us an example
of the data,
of the kind of data that a PLC will be using?
Good. So PLCs, first of all, it's known as a second order change. It's kind of a change that deals with attitude, beliefs, and philosophy. Then it also goes down to practice. So which means you must see attitudinal behavioral changes.
Where? With the teachers?
With the teachers.
Okay.
And then you also see academic changes with the students. And how do you see that? It's based on the skill set. So if you look at Bloom's taxonomy about students being able to describe, to understand, to design, to explain, once you start going to assessment, how are they able to develop these skill sets? Was they've gone through the PLCs? Was they've gone through this intervention? Now, before the intervention, what were they able to do? After the intervention, what are they able to do now? So is that kind of an assessment where you look at what was possible, what was not possible, and what is now possible as a result of this process? So it's a change of philosophy, it's a change of approach, it's a change of behavior, it's a change of practice that now affects outcomes. So this is test scores, formative assessments, what they can describe, what they can do, what they can say.
Okay, so, and would you be looking at, Malaysia test scores are so important. Many teachers will just want to measure this in terms of students' improvement in test scores.
which is a limited way of looking at it. So it's a very, again, it goes back to teaching for the test.
Yeah.
So you just teach for the test. You're not actually teaching for learning. And this is the disconnection with PLC. PLCs are meant for lifelong learning, for adaptability and problem solving. They're not meant for test scores.
That's a very important point to remember, that PLCs are not meant to just for test scores. It is supposed to focus on lifelong learning skills. So if you were a teacher in a school, for example, or you were a member of a PLC, right? How would you go about? So let's say your management said, okay, we've got a new philosophy in school, a new approach to principle to learning amongst teachers and improving student performance. Start a PLC. So, and now here you are, you're all sitting together and you're frowning and looking at each other. Where would you start? What would you ask?
I think there's a question there about that. I think one of the key things which we miss is that PLCs, once they're imposed, it's difficult to bring out the benefits of it. PLCs don't just come about because people want to increase, the test score, like I said before, but it comes from an innate drive for your organization to learn how to adapt, how to change, and how to respond to that change in such a way that you give everybody the capacity and the mastery to embrace change, to solve problems, and to be able to move forward as you're developing. So even if we're looking at just the angle of assessments, then PLCs are not really what we need in our schools. Then people will be forced to teach for the test. So we want systems where people are being empowered to take account of their own learning and see how that learning affects their own practice, that affects their classroom experiences for the learners, for their benefit. So it's about transferring that kind of capacity.
So I think Mr. Combo also asked that question. When you form this PLC, I think many people, actually more than one person asked this question. I remember Ms. Zahra from Lebanon asked the question, who comes together, what is the composition of a PLC?
So it's everyone who's involved in the learning project. Again, PLCs are systemic. PLCs is a system thinking approach. It's how do we come together as a school and how do we address our strategic goals in terms of learning, in terms of mathematics, in terms of literacy. Once we address those goals, we now break them down into different PLCs. You have data teams, you have research teams, you have whatever they are, but they have a core objective to improve learning. So who's involved in it? It's who takes a stake in those processes. So the landscape where you're operating the PLC determines who should be involved and who should be involved.
So what if, sometimes in schools there are really strong hierarchies of power and authority. So especially something I found in Malaysia is that the principal is seen as a demigod, a person that's not approachable, or sometimes principals don't really get involved in teaching and learning in the country, but so how do you break that down? That I can take off my hat as the principal, or break down this principal-teacher gap that exists.
I think that's a very challenging one because it's quite systemic. Again, it's a whole system. It's a system approach. So if from the origin we have this culture where it's very, very power based, based on hierarchy, based on power distance, it's difficult to train people to a system to embrace collaboration. It's difficult to go through the system to have people who embrace, mutual respect and a flat system of, leadership or governance where people can share power, where there's distributed leadership. In fact, one of the angles of PLC is shared leadership, distributed leadership, teacher leadership. Now, how do you bring this together when you want to hold on to power? It's not going to work. So there's always going to be this friction and this break. In PLCs in Malaysia, for example, which is more very, very vertical. Why? Because of those power structures.
Yeah.
So it's not something a teacher can handle at the classroom level. In fact, I've had teachers who resign from the schools because of that. Because you can't infiltrate the system.
Yeah.
It's made of elites. It's made of big.
So now the question is a question of imposing it on teachers. Now, sometimes I think imposing.
Yeah.
oops, sorry, imposing is maybe the wrong word, because sometimes a decision is made, right? Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
You don't know what you don't know. So sometimes a school's leadership team makes the decision that they are going to introduce PLCs.
Yeah.
And they make their decision to introduce PLCs because they realize the power of it, but teachers don't yet realize it. So sometimes you have to put something in place so that people can experience the joy
benefit,
and the success. And I think it's all about how you manage the introduction of this in your school so that your teachers don't feel, oh, they're imposing this upon me, but that they feel it's a learning journey.
Yeah.
And I also fervently believe that principals can't introduce this if they themselves have not been part of it, right? Or do you think it's something you can just say to your teachers, okay, start with this, but you yourself have not yet experienced it and you don't really believe in it? I mean, as a principal, how will you go about starting PLCs in your school?
Okay, so in the schools I've been through in Malaysia, one of the key things which is important is that there must be the leadership buy-in. The leadership must believe in the vision or on the power of PLCs. And because they're the ones who are supposed to provide the structures and the processes under which it's going to sustain it. So you can't have PLCs in the school where the leaders don't believe in it. So if they do believe in it, that's one thing. But the second thing is how do you get your teachers to also feel comfortable and to accept the value in the PLC? Which means you must share information, you must craft out a message for the change, you must tell them why it's important, and tell them the benefits for their own classes and for their schools and for the children they're teaching. So it is how you craft the change message. Again, I'll go back to change. People will resist change, and I think there's a question on that on one of the questions. People will resist change when they don't know what is the purpose of the change, but they can't find the cause of the change, but they can't find the benefit for the change to them as well as a person, and when they don't understand the whole change process.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, definitely. I think, and it's like with anything in your school, right? You must always manage the change and take people through the process and equip them with the right skill set so that they know what to do, how to do it. And a lot of the questions here, for example, somebody asked, what kinds of questions do we ask in a PLC?
Good. So that was a very funny question because a PLC, like I said, it's been reduced to an umbrella term that people say we come to learn. PLCs have different kinds of meetings, first of all, big broad meetings. The very first meetings about PLCs exploratory meetings, which is inquiries. We're trying to find out what are the learning problems, what are the gaps, how are our children achieving, what are the achievement gaps we have, and what are the difficulties in learning, which areas are they delivering, which areas are they struggling with. Second kinds of meetings are strategic meetings, they are planning meetings, they are learning meetings. And the third kinds of meetings are assessment meetings. We're trying to find out which strategy has worked, which one hasn't worked, and how can we improve. So under those three broad categories of meetings, we have questions that you ask, and they all have their protocols and templates which you use. So when someone asks, what kind of questions are you asking the PLC? What kind of activities are you doing in the PLC? Should be the first question.
Yeah.
The activities will now give you a guide of questions which you can go through.
So would you like to just recap that for our teachers? So what are the three different kinds that you have?
I'm not so sure they're just three kinds.
Yeah.
Based on my research and based on the work I've done.
Yes.
I teach it in three ways. So there are three different groups of meetings. The first group of meetings are exploratory or inquiry meetings.
Okay, so inquiry, basically you're asking, what do we want to learn about? What are the problems? Yes. What do our students know? What don't they know? What are issues? Yeah. What is something new we would like to learn together, right? Yes. Okay, so that's the inquiry. Yeah.
But before the inquiry meeting, we have the establishment meeting, which is when you set the vision, you set the norms, you set the aims. That one's a very simple, basic meeting. So the second category of meetings is what we call the strategic meetings, which is the learning meetings.
Okay.
So what are we going to learn today? We're going to learn project-based teaching. We're going to learn inquiry teaching. We're going to learn interdisciplinary inquiries. We're going to learn how to use small group activity. We're going to use how to use flashcards. We're going to use formative assessment. So they're grouped in that format. Now, this kind of meetings have their own kind of protocol and their own kind of activities and their own kind of processes. Then after you have now the assessment meetings, which are now assessing what you have done from your action research, what you have done from your intervention, what you have done from the whole process you've gone through. And you also have embedded within that is reporting.
Yes.
So the assessment, you have to report what has worked, what hasn't worked, what needs to be restructured or reconfigured, and what has to go next.
So one thing that strikes me, and this reminds me of our previous discussion on change management, when you did the stakeholder, we talked about the stakeholder analysis, is the documentation.
Yeah, very important.
So what you've mentioned here is that you can't just come together casually after tea and say, okay, now we're quickly going to have a PLC meeting. It has to have structure. It has to be recorded. Now teachers might come and say, oh, lots of extra paperwork. Why must we do this?
Yeah.
Because it's a complaint we so often hear here in Malaysia very often. So much extra paperwork. Could it be something that where you could perhaps use technology to help you record your discussions instead of necessarily creating long reams of paper for yourself?
Yeah. So one of the schools which I've worked with again here has been, they've used Google Docs extensively.
Yes.
And in fact, they use Google Docs for everything. To showcase what they're doing, to showcase how they're doing it, to even show pictures of classroom observations and and classroom displays. So the use of technology under a PLC is a very, very important strategy for your success. Why? First thing is data collection. Second is data analysis. Third is tracking progress and data usage. And the fourth is data display. How do you do that? So some schools have data rooms where you can walk in, you see displays of great literacy, you see maths, not all schools have that luxury.
Yeah.
So what do you use? You leverage in technology.
Yeah.
In technology, you can have dashboards that can show you all this information. So PLCs and technology are very, very good. In fact, I used to ask people to use Schoology. So Schoology is a platform where you can use to kind of use your PLC.
Yeah. So we in our EduLead program, we really rely on our coaches to understand the use of Google and Google tools.
Okay.
So our coaches all have a Google Drive. They've learned how to share documents, upload evidence, use Google Forms to gather data, and all of these have been successfully used. And it's really very heartening to hear you confirm that technology should and could be used to make your life easier as a teacher. And I think it's about working smarter and not necessarily harder. Now, what you've described might feel a little bit overwhelming for teachers who are just setting out on a PLC.
That's why leadership is important.
Yeah.
They need leadership. They need PLC coaches as well.
Yeah.
And take them through the process.
But you can perhaps start in a very simple way, right?
Yeah,
I think it takes us back to that question we want to ask. Don't start by asking hundreds of questions. Ask one question that you want to know. By using this strategy in my class, am I improving this particular aspect of learner performance? So I'm going to try this one collaborative learning approach, or I'm going to use this or this or this, and then we're going to track and discuss and see how it's working and learn from each other. So let's go back to some of our other questions that were raised by our. Is there a question you would like to highlight?
How much time do you need?
Yeah, let's just pick a few from our coaches.
So how can I manage strategies if I find?
How can I change my strategies if I find out the old ones are not working well during a PLC meeting? So that's a good question. I mean, do we have to get stuck be stuck in and this is a question by Miss Amira from Lebanon. So what do I do? I've started out and I see it's not working.
So, I talked about three categories of meetings. So you have the assessment meeting. So in the assessment meetings, we're gonna analyze, deconstruct the problems, what did not go well, and why. And then you also look at the evidence. So you can't just assume. It must be based on qualitative evidence or quantitative evidence. So what's the classroom observation saying? How did the lesson go? What did they find difficult? And an important part is also how they use formative assessment techniques in the class to get students to demonstrate if they've learned or not, because you can't use the test. So you need that. And at the end of the day, you want to go back and reconstruct your hypothesis or your research questions and then try again. So it's a continuous process. That's why PLC is an ongoing learning process. It's not a one-stop process.
Yeah.
So it's a continuous change, adapt, change, adapt, change, adapt.
So you should not be stuck in one way. If you are doing everything the same and have asked the same questions all the time, then actually you must reflect on your own practices. So that brings us to another question, and that question was also asked by quite a number of our EduLead coaches, and that is, so how long is a PLC cycle? Do you bring together a particular group of people for a particular period of time, or do we have the same people, and how long, and somebody asked, how long in between PLC meetings must we have? So let's give them some practical tips.
Okay, so let's start with how long between meetings. So how long between meetings would depend on the meeting. Would depend on the urgency of the action points of the previous meetings. So if we're dealing with inquiries and we need to gather data, we might have multiple meetings. If we're dealing with learning, we might have few meetings. If we're dealing with assessment, we might have multiple meetings. So it depends on the meeting. I don't know if you get it.
Yeah.
So for example, if you want to implement a new way of doing formative assessments, we're not going to have a lot of meetings. We're going to have one single meeting where someone will demonstrate how it looks like in a real session, and then they're going to implement that. So you're going to give them time to implement, give them time to also collect feedback.
Yeah.
Then they'll come back. If it's about your first meeting where you're trying to establish the PLC, you have many meetings, because you need to have meetings for vision and mission, norms, what is right and what is not right, when do you meet, the schedule, the planning. You need to have how you establish rewards. You need to plan how you're going to build tools for the meetings. So then you will need a lot of meetings. So if it's an early PLC, a lot of meetings. If it's maturing, it's less meetings.
So what I'm deducing from this, and this is very much what we did in our EduLead course as well. I did share some structures for them in terms of deciding on your vision, deciding on how you will meet, your norms, meaning what is acceptable, how do we communicate, how do we give feedback to each other, because people can feel quite vulnerable, especially in sharing things that they're not successful in. And to open that up in front of your colleagues is not an easy thing. And also that was a question one of our coaches asked, a very meaningful question. So don't rush into it. There has to be time, and that means you will have a fixed PLC group for a reasonable amount of time, because as you are adapting these norms and all these values, you can't be doing that for 2 weeks or 3 weeks and then you're in a new PLC. So basically what you've said now is that, number one, it takes time there will be more meetings in the beginning to set it up and to establish your vision, your mission, your norms, how you communicate, plan your agenda, plan your meeting time.
The language, the toolkit takes time to build. It takes about a year to build the toolkit for a PLC.
Yeah. But we also have to be realistic, because sometimes we know that it does, but sometimes we can also help people, right, to provide some of these tools.
Yeah.
And you can refine it over time. So it doesn't mean that I can't have my PLC immediately because I don't have all of all of this stuff.
No. It's progressive.
Yeah.
I think what I wanted to say was, let's say we decide to have a PLC now, it would take us at least a year or two to actually have a workable model of our toolkit, which is our language and teaching, because it's also shared teaching, observable lessons. It's also how you assess interdisciplinary. So you need to have the language together which you share. You need to have a toolkit which you all understand, which someone can use from grade one, and change the text can understand. So it takes time to build those things.
So would you say that's a school-based activity?
Yes, it's embedded, it's contractual, it's within your time frame as a school time. So it's I think someone asked that, how do you go about it? It should be an official program in your school calendar.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is why, but what I meant was in this establishing and developing this toolkit, the language.
Yeah.
What I mean is that's not for different PLCs in a school. That would be the whole school's approach. That's I just want that to be very clear that you can't have a mathematics teacher's PLC or a primary, whatever, others and they have different norms or different ways of communicating. That should be a school-wide approach that is accepted by everybody. So that's very important to clarify. And so a new teacher that comes into a school will know how to fit in. So they don't have to go through this process. So basically, if it's a new process in your school, it might take some time to establish. But once established, then it's fine. So you've mentioned another very important thing, and that this must be part of your school calendar. So when you strategy, calendar must be monitored, must be an expectation, must be evaluated. So it must also be part of the teacher's performance management. Now, I think this is where things go wrong. And I'm going to quote Malaysia again, right? Because
that's what you know.
I've worked in many other countries as well, and I've seen this in our EduLead programs as well.
I can give you feedback from the evidence of Malaysia.
Yes, it's not monitored, it's not prioritized, it's not calendarized, it's not there's no feedback on the individual teacher's performance. There's no peer assessment of my performance as somebody working in my group. So if that doesn't happen, then it's not going to be a success, right?
It's a place where ladies chat.
Yeah, then it becomes a tea drinking session, right?
A place where ladies chat.
Yeah, so we've learned a few things now already. We've learned that you must plan it. There are different kinds of meetings. The time in between meetings is determined by the inquiry that you are busy with. Sometimes you have to have more regular meetings. Sometimes you can have a bigger space while teachers are implementing a new strategy, they're learning, they're peer observing, they're gathering data. So, there's no hard and fast rule to say you must have a PLC meeting every week. No, it could be that at different times of the year you would meet with more or with less frequency as well, depending on the task. But that this is a school-wide expectation, and that's why leadership plays such a big role in the success of PLCs. So what would you say is the role of the leader in making PLCs work in the school?
Two simple rules: providing the right environment, establishing the structures and the procedures, and reward systems.
So talk about rewards. Sometimes it's frowned upon. People will say, "Well, it's your job. Why must you get rewarded for doing this?"
Okay, so I'm happy. I think I also wrote down the question there. So reward is mostly in terms of how you give people recognition for the value they create. It not necessarily monetary. It could be, a signpost at the entrance of the school saying, "This teacher did this." It could be Mr. That. You can give him a token. You can give him a day off. You can be given a day for a speech. There are just so many ways you can motivate a teacher, not just necessarily with money. And so PLCs, what we do is you give, for example, the ones here, they give them trips. They can go to Genting Highlands, they can go to Langkawi. But it depends on if you meet your targets.
Yes.
So it must be assessed. There must be a leadership assessment that says, we set out to achieve this with our great students and for ourselves, and we have met it.
Yes.
And they say, oh yes, let's celebrate this success. And that's the energy you want.
And I think that is so important, that so often in schools data is gathered, but there's no feedback that's given or analysis of the data, or no celebration of that success. So it's very important for our coaches who are watching this to reflect on. We so often talk about rewarding students. We talk about positive behavior management, reward charts, all kinds of things. But teachers are also human beings,
I need that.
And there's a stick and there's a carrot approach, right? So there's what is expected of you, but at the same time, you can never know if you're successful unless clear targets have been set, so that you know exactly what is expected of you.
It also helps you build your confidence as someone who can achieve your own goals that you set to yourself. So
Yeah.
it's very, very good thing for teachers to be held accountable. There's that collective sense of responsibility as well.
Yeah. And that's part of handing over and building that trust as well, and an opportunity to develop teacher leadership. Because within the PLCs, teachers can take leadership in ways that they might not, in an official capacity in the school, fulfill a leadership role. So, let's look at a few more questions.
Let's see. So, our question is
Okay, so I think I'm just going to ask this one. What is the role of a coach during a PLC?
Okay.
So is it the PLC that, this was a question also from Ms. Amira, if I'm not mistaken. No, from Ms. Doha. What's the role of a coach in establishing this? So we've got our EduLead coaches, right? They've learned about PLCs. They might not necessarily be the principal of the school. So when they go back to the school, what role should they play in the success of PLCs in their schools?
Leadership role.
So define some of the actions that they could take.
Yeah. So leadership is about you empowering people and influencing them to achieve more of what they're doing. So what that means is they want to be orchestrators of an environment that is conducive, that has collaboration, that has trust, that has respect and integrity, and that has a sense of collective learning. So they want to champion that. They want to demonstrate and model that so people can follow. That's leading. So it's not about authority, it's about you showing people that you can walk this path with me and feel safe, and we can make mistakes together and learn. It's a journey.
So maybe one way, if I can make a practical suggestion, is that the coach would start a PLC first and model this, so that if you've never been in a PLC and you've never gone through the process, it might be useful for you to establish a PLC around a particular topic in your school, and then let others observe and draw them in, so that they can experience and duplicate what you are doing. Or you must become a coach that helps them during the process and guides them with tools, with strategies, with giving feedback on the analysis. Sometimes sit in on the meetings and give them feedback. Would that be something that you would do?
So with the ones I don't want to call their names. The ones I've worked here with, we had teachers who would reach out. So you need to reach out with people who have an understanding of these things, who will support you. So what we call them external critical friends.
Yes.
So when you have a critical friend, who's an university, of course, maybe someone who's doing that kind of a research, you have teachers who have no formal authority, you have no position of power. But with your expertise and with your drive and passion and resilience, they're able to start chattering ways and convincing their colleagues to join them on the PLC journey. It's forming groups, learning together, collecting data about your learning, and seeing how you're implementing that to improve your own learning. It's classroom observation, it's learning walks, it's discussions, it's reflective practices, reflective dialogues, and how you use that with an external visitor in the university, for example. So what schools should do, which I would encourage, which is also in the literature, is they should find external people or university lecturers who are working with these kind of things, who can inform them with the right theories. Because one of the things I found missing in PLCs is the element of research, inquiry. Teachers don't do research.
Yeah.
And even when they have the data, they don't know how to analyze and model the data to have insightful information to use to inform their practice. So you need someone who can help you. So if your PLC coaches or your editing coaches can serve as data coaches, that becomes a powerful notice for that whole process.
Yeah. I think it's, we should just be careful that we don't make this something that teachers feel, oh, this is too difficult for me.
Yeah.
I don't have the expertise. I mean, what Henry is describing is the Rolls Royce of
complex.
of PLCs, right? So I think you should always say, let's just start. Let's start to find answers to those good questions. So your question must be very good. Your inquiry must be very specific, and it must be measurable, and it must be, a small area of focus to start off with. So that it's not that you feel, I need a PhD in data analysis in order to run a PLC. It's also in that collaboration and just the coming together of colleagues to say, let's reflect together, let's share our evidence, let's dig deeper and see, let's go under the surface, because this is how we will restore the belief in teachers in Malaysia, and not just in Malaysia. I mean, this is it transforms the philosophy, but it also would restore the view of a teacher as a professional practitioner, rather than just somebody who just delivers information. Because the role of a teacher today is changing, and if we don't change our practices and model inquiry and reflection and professional research and action research and all of this and document this, we are going to become dinosaurs. Computers will take over. Kids will go online and learn online. So we have to fight for our role in ensuring that learning continues. I don't know if you agree with me.
Yeah, I do. I think when I was coming here, I was thinking about what you just mentioned about the worst role of PLCs. And I was thinking, I was invited last year to review a PhD for a lady who did PLC assessments in Sabah. And after reading the document, I said, this was not PLC, this was just something else. And so when elements of PLCs are missing, it's missing. You just can't.
You can't call it a PLC. They call it a meeting rather.
Yeah. And so the elements of action research and you being able to deliver inquiry doesn't necessarily need you to have a PhD. It's a very simple step, like you said before. It's how you collect the information now. How do you go about collecting the information? What kind of information? What's the data source? What's the implication of the data? How do I make sense of it? How do I use it? That's what is missing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't need an academic degree. It just needs you to understand. The moment you can understand that, you can make sense of that and understand the gaps, you now need to have some kind of a theoretical backing to actually bring in new methods, new strategies, new techniques. Then you need some kind of knowledge and source, which you might not necessarily always find it in the schools. And so you need external people, people like yourself. They invite speakers. They have CPDs from other bodies like ACAP and the rest. So there's an element of you being teachers, for example, being able to measure the temperature of the classes. They need to have that capacity. What's the temperature of learning taking place? What is not happening right? That is the inquiry. So it's not necessarily the academic research we do every day, but it's how you use the information you have, you dispose of, and transform into something informative.
Yeah, I think it's for me it's a cycle of improvements. So it's start off with a question that you want to have answered. My students are not engaged in my classroom. Why do I teach mathematics Form 1, for example? And I notice that boys are more engaged than girls. So I might ask, why are the girls not? I mean, this is just an idea. This is not necessarily the truth. But why are the girls not engaged during the science lessons, for example? Or why is it that this particular element of mathematics everybody seems to be struggling with? Or why is it that my children are struggling to present an argument, a strong argument in an argumentative essay? Yes. Or it must be something real. It mustn't be, oh, I need to improve the maths result from a B to an A. That's too big. You can never find that answer. It could be around, okay, well, my students are not engaged in lessons. They lie on their arms. They never ask questions. Um, so now, what two strategies can we follow? So let's try a cooperative learning, some cooperative learning structures. Let's do flipped learning, whatever it is that you're going to do, and then you say, okay, so how will I measure engagement now? So is it that somebody's coming into my class and observes my students and uses a tool to say, okay, this is how many times students ask questions, this is how many times they spoke to somebody else, what, and then I do it, I use the strategy, and then I go back and I measure it again, right? And then I analyze the data to say there was a 20% improvement in this aspect or in that aspect. Because of this. But you also have to say, why did you choose that strategy? Well, research says that if I do this, so if you put that all together, and it might also be that it didn't work.
Of course.
Okay, so I tried this and now I measure it and there's no change. So then why did that change? Did I choose the wrong strategy? Is it that it works for boys and not for girls? Is it that it works in Sabah but not in Sarawak? There's and that's the inquiry that you as a teacher have to bring to the table. But so often, Henry, teachers will say, I don't have the time to do this. My curriculum is too full. My syllabus is too full. I have too much marking to do. When am I supposed to do this? I was with a group of teachers the other day who said, I'm too old to learn all of this new stuff. How can you expect of me to do all this extra work? Well, I mean, what answer would you give a teacher who tells you that?
Go get a business.
Yes, resign, right?
I'll teach you how to do business. Leave the profession. Because what we don't see is the repercussion of this lukewarm attitude to education. It's going to come back to us. It's more like I was asking someone last night. But imagine if I was teaching you medical surgery. And every day I say, oh, don't worry, lad. You don't need to learn this. Let me just teach you these basics and then you're fine and you pass. Just learn these things and you pass. And then the day you finish, you graduate, and I'm sick, I need medical surgery. Would I want to have you? No.
Yeah.
Because I know you don't know.
Yeah.
Because you've just passed the test. You don't have the substance. And this is the approach I see with teachers to say, oh, we don't have time. What do you have time to do then?
Yes.
To give marks to the test? So it's an attitudinal problem. That's why I say it's a belief. You must first of all change the philosophy. And I was saying this to one principal that if you find teachers who resist the culture of innovation, of learning, the culture of inquiry, please ask them to leave. They should go and look for a different kind of job. Because schools are not meant for teaching. Schools are meant for learning.
Yes, and I think in Malaysia, and I mean, I'm sorry I'm mentioning Malaysia, but actually I can talk very broadly about this because I've seen this in many countries. It's just that it's been something that I've experienced recently. And that is that teachers expect the learners to change their learning behaviors. They want them to be inquirers, they want them to be collaborators, they want them to be problem solvers, but teachers themselves don't model those behaviors. And if you don't model this for the children, you cannot tell them, do what I tell you to do, but don't do what I'm doing. And we see so little collaboration and reflection and that action research and inquiry from teachers.
Yeah.
But if you don't change this, and in a changing world where process now is more important than product, or the process of learning and the skills we are teaching our children is much more important than the knowledge that they acquire, because knowledge is changing on a daily basis. So if you don't do this, then what's going to happen? We see this. They keep on having to teach the same information over and over and over and over. They have to, at the exam time, they say, oh, we need 3 months for revision because children never truly deeply understood the concepts that drove the learning. And hence, as you said before, what do you have time for? Well, I have time for teaching the same work over and over and over again.
Expecting different results.
And then you end up hating your job because it's so boring, right? So it could make life very exciting as well. But I think this is where the leadership again plays a very big role. A leader should never accept a teacher who's just breathing, just delivering a textbook. A leader should drive that inquiry, and that's part of the vision of the school.
I think it's a systemic problem, because I think only Finland is trying to model what it takes to have, a professional status that reflects inquiry, that reflects learning. See, because if you don't address it from a national perspective or district perspective, teachers at the classroom will always just find ways to play around it. Because if at one hand they want test scores, and the other one you want them to learn, what is the district driving? What are the principals driving? They're driving for test scores.
Yeah.
What are parents driving? Test scores. So there's a disconnect.
And you have to be empathetic for teachers as well, because they are caught in a situation where, on the one hand, that's what the system is asking, but at the same time, they are also asked to change the way that learning happens. But my view is, if you change the depth of learning and you really promote inquiry in your classroom, results will come.
Yes.
You don't have to worry about the exam results. It will naturally follow when children are engaged and inquisitive, and when they are collaborating and when they are sharing in their learning.
Exactly what I said last week, and I'll tell you why. Do you know why? We have no control over learning. They have. You can't force a child to learn.
No, you cannot.
They learn.
Yeah.
All you do is facilitate that learning. So we should think about the whole process again, because I think we think that once we go and do all these maneuvers, learning is going to happen magically. No, they are the ones responsible for learning, and they make it happen or not.
Yeah.
But we need to facilitate that process. And how do we do it? Is to help them become more inquisitive, more embracing with new concepts, more engaging. So students have that in them already.
Yes.
But we killed it in school because we want them to give us answers which are already in textbooks. I always say, I did this exercise last week. I asked teachers who were here for interdisciplinary approach to inquiry, and I asked them, what do you understand by interdisciplinary inquiry? They're like, we've never heard about it. I'm like, okay, you have the answer over there. So where? So on your smartphones, Google it.
Yeah.
So that it's there already. So knowledge is there. The understanding is not there because we don't engage with it.
Yes.
So we can't go and teach people. We need to enable them to find information.
Yeah.
They will learn. They will go beyond the roof of national demands.
And we are underestimating what our children can achieve, because I think a lot of this sits within our own fear of what we ourselves don't know.
Yeah.
And because we ourselves are not sure, we then build a fence around it. What if I ask questions I can't answer? What if they don't? There's I think it's this fear of stepping outside of this really safe environment in which we have existed. And I think in our discussion, we've answered a lot of the questions. Mr. Fikri from Indonesia asked, for example, does every PLC need to have a shared vision? Yes, it was very obvious that we talked about that before, right? We talked about how do teachers collaborate. We talked about how to, what are the processes? How long does a PLC have to be? What is the composition of a PLC? How do we reward teachers and get teachers to buy into this? And I think that I'm going to give an opportunity to people to ask a few more questions. If there's anything that I'm just going to quickly scroll through these questions. Some teachers are afraid of sharing their problems because they don't want others to see their vulnerabilities. How do I overcome this? And this was a question also by Mr. Fikri. How do we overcome this? How do we make them feel safe so that it's okay to share that you don't have all the answers?
So leadership has to create that environment. It goes back to leadership. You need to create an open door policy, a psychologically safe place where people can make mistakes, they can say things, they can be corrected, they are respected, they're trusted as professionals. And you have to model that. So you don't just say, I'll do this, but you need to do it in action. So there's a language, there's a way you say it, and then the actions that you follow through to support what you said.
And that's got to be coherent. Yes. Your body language, how you model this, how you said it, how consistent you are. Mm-hmm. Because if people don't feel, once that trust relationship is broken, it's very, very difficult to restore it. And people should, we always say walk the talk, but I think it's much more than just walking the talk. It's really, really being that change and that is all linked back to your vision. What do you want to achieve? What is your mission in life? What do you believe? What is your value system? And then that must be a shared value system for the school and for these PLCs, for children, in order to be able to also feel safe in that environment. It is 5:30. We've had an hour. I'm sorry for the technical glitches. There's a huge storm outside and it's made a tremendous noise. But we hope that you gain some information, and thank you very much to everybody who has contributed questions. Something, Dr. Henry, that's come up for me is the next one should be around formative assessment. In Malaysia, teachers are really struggling with the new classroom-based assessment policy of the government. And also we have the discontinuation of examinations starting in grade 1, 2, and 3, which would now move upwards. Teachers really don't understand how to go about formative assessment. It's something we have addressed in our EduLead program, and we address it in our Engage program, but we will do that in our next webinar, and we will also share with you the written answers to your questions that we've put together for you. And we will put that in our next EduLead newsletter as well as on our Facebook page. Thank you very much for everybody for contributing and participating and being here with us today. Can't believe an hour has gone by. Thank you to Fariza, thank you to Doha, thank you to Mr. Combo, to everybody who's been involved and who were active during the session. We will post these sessions on Facebook and on YouTube, and we can take the discussions from there, further from there. So thank you very much for coming and for sharing your depth of knowledge about PLCs. I think it's just a question of everybody continues to learn, right? I mean, there is so much that my message to you is don't be daunted or afraid by the fact that it's such a deep professional skill. Just don't stop. Start and go through the process and read online. There is a wealth of information. There are videos. We will also share more things for you to read and learn. But the best learning is shared learning and experiencing it together. And start with one simple question that you want to ask and go through that process and then reflect on how this is going to make a difference. So thank you, everybody, for participating. And we will meet you again next month, I think, when we talk about formative assessment. Right. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Take care.
The reason why I held it like this was I got a message to say the screen is upside. I don't know, for some other weird reason, something went wrong.
This one, please.
Oh, shucks. In stream. Oh, I did it again. All right. It's at least not too bad.
Yeah. That was good. So what we could do, we could